Everybody, welcome to our webinar on all things Web3. So every year we solicit feedback from our members on what content do you want to know more about. Needless to say, Web3 came up time and time again. This is why I am delighted that Justin Peyton, who heads up strategy and transformation at Wunderman Thompson APAC, is joining us today. Quick background on Justin. Justin actually had served on our regional board for a number of years, including on our executive committee. Working with him closely through this, I was able to see that he is at the absolute forefront of knowledge for anything new, fad, progressive when it comes to technology. I've already seen this session. It is outstanding, and I'm delighted to introduce Justin now to take you through this member exclusive on the Web3 opportunity, Metaverse and NFTs. So Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Miranda. Thank you very much. And it's always flattering you do me. You say you're too kind. I'm gonna share a screen now because that's what I have. And then we'll get into some content quick. And I have, I'll preface this by saying I have too many slides. So I'm gonna go very quickly and try to just run through this fast. But I'll start by just making sure, Miranda, you can see the screen. Is that correct? I'm going to assume that's correct, because I haven't heard no. Excellent. So we'll start by just kind of looking at kind of the progression and a little bit about me. Miranda did a little bit of an introduction. This is my introduction to myself. As you can see, it's a really busy slide for a this is who's talking slide, and that's because I use it for two purposes. Number one, to introduce myself, Chief Transformation Officer for Wunderman Thompson and APAC. But number two, to really look at how I would introduce myself differently between a Web 2 world, a Web 1 world, and a Web 3 world. And in a Web 1 world, obviously, I'd tell you about my role. I'd publish stuff. I'd say, this is what my job is. There'd be a bio. I could publish it. If you wanted to get in touch with me, you could. There'd be an email address. It's perfectly fine, but you'd have to trust me that what I tell you about myself is the correct information. In a Web 2 world, all of a sudden, you could start to see some of the actions that I take. You might be able to see the things that I like, the places I go and check into, and you could infer something from me there. You might be able to see some of the things that I retweet, some people who I might like admire or look as inspirational. But you might see where I went to school, where I work, that I have a newsletter, these things. These are all things that allow you to infer more information about me, so you can start to make some probabilistic assumptions. And the interesting thing about Web3 is, while the elements on the far side look probably the most obscure, they're actually the most deterministic, right? So there is a wallet address, two wallet addresses, one from Coinbase and one from MetaMask, both of which kind of refer to holdings that I have. You can start to see some NFTs that are there, which don't tell you very much at the moment, but realistically, that's part of what we'll talk about today, is what these could start to tell you. But the idea is that what you can see with this is a log of definitive actions that I have taken that are recorded onto a blockchain, so that all of a sudden my identity, my actions, my behaviors, they are categorized in a way which is complete, and where all of a sudden there is a more deterministic way of viewing me, because actually that information is accessible, right? So when we talk about Web3, when we talk about Metaverse, obviously we're talking about more than just kind of this VR space, even though that's captured a lot of attention. Really, when I talk about this, I want to talk about the intersection between a digital and a real world, where you have kind of sovereign identity and ownership of that identity, as we just talked about through those wallet addresses. That shift has started, right? If this is a nice little table, it kind of shows what the immersiveness of Web3 might be, or what the immersiveness of Metaverse might be, and the amount of time that you might spend in these kind of worlds where digital and the real world overlap. Top left-hand corner, VR goggles. Guess what? You put them on, you've got them on for a while. It might be very immersive, but the truth is, most people probably won't wear them for that long during the day, right? On the far right-hand side, top of the right-hand side, you've got augmented reality glasses. The tech's probably not quite there yet, but we're moving in that direction. But on top of that, I think it's really interesting when we talk about kind of, diversity, inclusivity, these sorts of things. Why do we think that metaverse technologies or these sorts of things are going to be purely visual? If you think about AirPods, they can already layer on part of a digital world. When I go for a run, something tells me, you know what, you've run your fastest mile, or you're being really slow, speed up. It's actually more polite than that. Obviously, Nike wouldn't say that to me. They'd try to be encouraging. But anyways, that's what I hear mentally. But you get the idea, is these things can start to layer in and connect a digital memory of the world with the real world. And so we're starting to see that shift start to happen. And we're seeing brands dive in all over the place, whether it's NVIDIA and the work that they're doing on Omniverse and the OpenAI that they're starting to put together behind that, the chipsets that they're putting together that will obviously drive a lot of the 3D rendering power, whether it be Facebook, who've obviously made their bet and even changed their names. So their camp is there. Microsoft, who are looking at the enterprise side and dealing with Microsoft Mesh and showing this is a version of Teams that looks way more appealing than the Teams that I'm typically working with, or whether it's the consumer side and dealing with brands like Nike, who have launched Nike Land into Roblox. Guess what? An environment where you can interact, where you can transact. These sorts of elements are all coming to life. And why is this happening now? Well, one thing that's got everybody's attention, obviously, is well, today and for the past couple of weeks, it's crypto market down, but it has been crypto market up. And so the media is really focused a lot of attention on value. The other one that's come to light with value is culture, right? So whether that be people selling an NFT for 69 million last year, whether that be Bored Ape Yacht Club making the cover of Rolling Stone and a number of different celebrities who are actually kind of diving into that, whether it be Facebook changing their name, whether it be Samsung at CES, taking their view on what immersive commerce would look like and opening their store, right? So where are we in this, right? What we're looking at, and obviously this is just indicative, but I think Google Trends are always a nice little indicative element. You can see what's happened over the past 12 months as far as Web3 goes. So the trend is way up about eightfold over the past year in terms of people talking about Web3. That of course is pales in comparison to the number of people that talk about Metaverse, and that of course pales in comparison to the number of people talking about NFTs. And even the FT is now on the NFT bandwagon and talking about how the future is non-fungible. And so what we're seeing within that obviously are brands who are diving in and making their play. And probably the biggest brand that made the biggest headlines at the end of last year, but continue to, are Nike. They bought a company called Artifact, RTFKT, but it's pronounced Artifact. And if you look at this slide, what I think is really interesting about this slide is Nike doesn't buy a lot of other brands. And you can see from the logos at the top, that's kind of Nike, Jumpman, so and Converse, and now Artifact. And so this is a really important play for them, is really the point that we're starting to see. And a few weeks ago, we started to see how that play is starting to come to life for them through elements like they dropped a new NFT, which was called Monolith, but you can start to see how they're starting to play with engagement and looking at what that's going to look like. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a little bit. And so their play has been to kind of buy a place and buy their way in but one of kind of the original brands who were Artifact made trainers for the metaverse is what they wound up doing. A very different strategy has been that taken by Adidas, who have formed partnerships. So they partnered with G Money, Bored Ape Yacht Club, Punks Comics, and what they have done is release an NFT based on Bored Ape Yacht Club. It's 30,000 of them. And what's interesting about that is that if you buy that, you get gated access to exclusive merchandise. You get gated access to exclusive content and likely access to many events. So this was something that was launched, and then on the resale market, you can buy your way in, be a member of this community, but that membership is actually transferable. So unlike the loyalty clubs that exist today, this is something where you can buy your way into the loyalty club because there's something that's important to you, because you want to be a part of it, because you really believe that, you know what, you want whatever the Adidas elements are that have value to you, but ultimately it is transferable. And that's a whole different way of starting to think about that loyalty membership. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But what I really want to highlight are the different strategies that we're seeing brands take all over the place, right? So whether that be gamevertising, access, commerce, or community. Those are the things that we're going to talk about, and we're going to kind of dive into. Gamevertising. This isn't a new element, right? This isn't something that we're talking about for the first time. We've been talking within the region and globally about the importance of gaming as part of a communication strategy, as part of a brand way of bringing things to life for quite a while. But it's really obvious when you look at the value. So gaming generates about 155 billion today, forecast to grow to 260. Let's just call it, nearly doubling by 2025. That's a pretty extraordinary growth rate. But the interesting side of it is really the fact that what it allows you to do, and the quote here from the CMO of Roblox is a really good one, is engage with your audience in a way that tells a story about your brand. The way I think about it is you can make your brand visceral, right? This is about making brands really tangible and tactile before someone actually needs to buy a product from the brand. That people can engage with it and feel everything about the culture, the values. You can bring it to life in a number of ways, but they can do it pre-purchase. And that's a very different way than what traditional advertising has done, where you can tell people, but they might not actually get the feel of it in the same way. And obviously that was brought to life by brands like Wendy's, who went in and partnered with Fortnite and created an area where the Wendy's values are all about never frozen. So they created a world where they created, I guess her name's Wendy, from Wendy's, would make sense. And you go around and smash freezers, right? And that's that. But what did it do? It brought the brand values to life. You also have environments where you can go and transact and sell. So Zepeto is a virtual world platform, kind of gaming platform, interaction and social platform, but where you can go in and you can buy access, you can buy different elements. This is something that shows there's a Ralph Lauren element, and these are selling. You can buy Ralph Lauren clothing for, it's not that expensive, $10-ish, $5-ish, depends on what the item actually is, but they're all accessible and affordable elements. And we'll talk about some of the less accessible and affordable elements in a little bit, but you get the idea. The interesting side of this is where gamevertising is going, right? So I talk about this from, there's an experiential partnership layer. There is a virtual product sales and looking at what the connection between a product might be virtually and in real life. But then where we're going, which is quite interesting, is kind of this new element of games, which is all around play to earn. And brands have always been, and marketing has always been about rewarding people in many ways for their interaction. Loyalty has been about how do we make sure that we're recognizing you for your interactions. Play to earn gaming models have developed a way of kind of saying, actually, if you engage, you wind up, this is an image from Axie Infinity. And the idea here is that you have an NFT, you buy an NFT, it battles other NFTs. You can breed them, you can also make them stronger and gain other elements for them. But ultimately those elements, because their NFTs are resaleable. And so as you engage, you wind up growing that. You also wind up getting other tokens, but we don't need to go into all of the way that works. The idea ultimately though is as you play, you get elements that become more valuable. And this idea of being able to do that, not just within the game, but being able to think, how can brands and businesses think about how people engage and how that engagement has practical, tangible value. And we're starting to see models that are coming out around not just play to earn, but things like learn to earn. So go through a course, do a training, and as you do that, you wind up with tokenized incentives and tokenized rewards that are saleable, that have other benefits, that have other values. And these are things that are starting to come out, which I would expect to see a lot of people experiment with in the coming 12 months. The next trend that I kind of wanted to kind of look at and opportunity area is around access. Obviously here we've got an image of Travis Scott and the concert which he had. 27 million people attended that. That is scary enough. That is the largest gathering of people in history, right? That's 27 million people participating in a single event. That from what I've understood from the research I've done, that's the largest single gathering of people for one event in history. And it's really important to think about that, because even though the world is opening back up, I'm based in Singapore, but obviously, you know, the and you can start to see people, you can start to go to the office, you can do more things. That said, the projection is that more events this year will be virtual than last year. And so we're still moving towards this kind of hybridization or virtual event. So this idea of access is quite interesting. And what do you do with that, right? But there's a whole lot of people that are experimenting with that and starting to think, how do we bring people closer to the action, make them feel like they are a part of history and a part of the engagement? There's always been this idea of how can we use technology, or how can we use loyalty clubs to give people unprecedented access? And we're going to see a lot of people start to play with that unprecedented access element as we go, or participate in events of personal importance. This is a wedding, which I think this happened about 2 weeks ago in India with IAB. Hold on, I seem to have, I'm not quite sure what happened to my headphones, but hopefully you can still hear me. I don't know why it just switched to my headphones, but anyways, I'm back hopefully. But this is about being able to manage those personal sides of things. The other one, which was done very well, the Australian Open, ran the Australian Open, and they kind of thought about what that would mean in a number of different places. So obviously there was in real life. They launched in Decentraland. They gave people NFTs. They gave people daily POAPs. Those POAPs unlocked gated content, and the NFTs actually had value and benefit as well. Beyond just being collectible, they had value and benefit in the sense of a sense of a prize draw and these sorts of elements. So there's all kinds of engagement layers that are being created by connecting virtual worlds and real worlds together. The other element that's increasingly common, and you'll see there was a lovely meme that kind of went around the internet a while ago, which talked about how people log into things, log in with your email, log in with Facebook, or just connect wallet. And what you're starting to see more of is exactly that. So this is a cosmetics brand, and they are giving access to pricing based on an NFT that you might hold. So prove that you own a crypto check, and you get a certain benefit. So connect your MetaMask wallet, show that you own the right NFT, and you wind up with additional value. And we're gonna see more and more of that as these different communities partner together. Another area when we talk about access, and as I said, the theme here is really, what is the real world and this virtual world? How do they overlay? How do they connect? And how do we bring those things together? So this is Gary Vee's latest project, actually, in New York. And he is opening a restaurant. It's a sushi restaurant, as you could probably guess from the images, called Fly Fish Club. And the idea is really, really simple, right? It's a members club. To get a restaurant reservation, you have to be a member. Membership is transferable. Buy the NFT, you're a member, but you will only be able to book a reservation, to book a seat at this table if you own that NFT. So all of a sudden there's a new mechanic for how that works. And there's only a limited number of NFTs that are being put out, probably in reality not enough to sustain a restaurant. And as such, they're starting to look at mechanics that exist around that, around how do you give people a dividend and a revenue stream as NFT owners, beyond just the fact that it might appreciate in value. How do you start creating those elements as well? And so in this case, this is an NFT that you can own, but technically you can lease it as well. So if you're an owner of this, you could lease it out. And if the restaurant truly becomes as desirable as I'm sure he hopes it will be, and as exclusive as he hopes it will be, then there will be people who will want to rent that NFT to get that reservation and to be able to show up. So this idea of kind of connecting those real world loyalty elements, those real world club and membership elements with a digital world is quite interesting. So when we think about kind of the access side of things, what we're really talking about are three things. This idea of being able to extend access to events and in real life experiences, right? So this idea of taking those experiences, giving people an extended view in the way that to a degree the Australian Open did, or the way concerts do, right? This idea also of
being able to bring people closer to what you do, bring them behind the scenes, give them previously unavailable access to what's actually happening, and do that through a virtual world and through a virtual environment is quite an interesting area that we're starting to see a number of people explore, and especially in the sporting world, but you're starting to see more of that start to come to life. But I think the real interesting side is how you can also start to look at the tokenization of membership programs and of loyalty programs, to be able to say, how do we create a community where this is gated, and here's how the value mechanics of those things actually work in the way that Gary's actually doing there. I'm going to talk a little bit about commerce. Obviously, commerce has probably been one of the biggest trends and one of the fastest growing elements during this whole COVID period. This is an image from a Burberry store. It's a very Web2 image that kind of connects a little bit of a Web2 idea and still virtual environments. But what you see is kind of a flat image and a stationary image of a store, and hotspots within that store where you can go, click, get more product information, and look at what that could actually mean, and be able to explore products in what feels like a slightly more interactive way than it would if you're just looking at the display. But still, it is quite static. This is a piece of work that was done a few years ago, although it only kind of resurfaced recently. It was done by Walmart as an exploration of how could they build a supermarket in a metaverse type environment, and they've said outright, this is not something they're building. This was just an experiment. I use it as an example only because what we're seeing a lot of are people thinking about how they recreate what exists today in a virtual environment. And let's be honest about this. What we don't love about the supermarket is going and looking at 3 different shelves and trying to find the thing, and invariably walking past it because it was on the bottom part of the shelf and you missed it, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a notion, and it existed with when the iPhone came out, and when every new experience, the first thing you do is start building the familiar, and so this idea of skeuomorphic kind of behavior of building something that's really familiar. But the idea here should be, and what we're going to start to see more of, is people that are looking to defy the laws of physics, change rules, and create environments that are a little bit more customized to that. But we're still early in that day, whether it be kind of that virtual environment, or whether it be this kind of more decentralized view that Samsung launched at CES when they launched their 837X store, to say, okay, here's what a Samsung flagship store would actually look like in a metaverse environment. You can come explore our products, shop, buy, transact, etc. Whether it be the kinds of partnerships that we're seeing in the fashion world, this is Balmain and Barbie. These are real life Barbies and NFTs. They sold for somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 each, depending on what you wanted to get. But the point here was to be able to create some unexpected partnerships that can be promoted and drive that kind of real value as a collectible element. Dolce & Gabbana took that a step further. They created a collection. They had 9 NFTs in the collection. They said, I think I might misquote them, but what they said was, these are clothing items that are designed from gems that could almost exist in the real world, but sold for 5.7 million. The key point here is that these sorts of things are happening, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, I showed some Ralph Lauren stuff earlier. The Gucci released, the interesting story here, Gucci released their Dionysus bag, and they launched that in I'm drawing a complete blank, but in one of the virtual worlds, and they sold it for 1 hour only, and they sold it for cheap. You know, it was a cheap bag because it was just something that they sold, but they sold it for 1 hour only. And after that hour was done, it's the after sales, it sold for $4,000. Right, so it sold for more than the real bag did after that. They also have looked at how they can create trainers, and this is Gucci Sneaker Garage, where you can customize and make anything bespoke. And these are affordable elements where you can go in, make what you want, create these for your avatar, and have all of this element. Fashion is really playing well, as you would expect, because people when we think about Web3, when we think about kind of the deterministic elements of Web3, but also when we think about Metaverse, when we think about presenting ourselves, there's a lot of identity brands that are kind of leading the charge as far as how they actually do that, as people think about what their identity in that space is and look to personalize that. But it's also the investment space. So this is a company called 4K. They're taking those luxury items and taking them as the NFTs, and taking real world items and making NFTs out of them. So this is a company, if you believe that a Rolex is going to go up in value, you could buy a Rolex, you could keep it, or you could buy your Rolex from 4K. They'll never give you the Rolex. They'll keep it in a vault. It'll be mint condition. It'll be beautiful. It'll be perfect. Or it'll be a used one, but they'll keep it in a perfect condition. And what you'll get to prove that you own it is just the NFT. And if you want the Rolex, if you want the bag that they're selling, if you want whatever the item is, you can have it. Absolutely. You can have it. But if you choose to have it, they're going to burn the NFT. So only one of them can exist, one of the two. Damien Hirst is doing a similar thing. He's painting 100 paintings right now, and he's selling them all as NFTs and physical paintings. And when you buy them, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want the physical painting or do you want the NFT? And if you choose to take the NFT, he's going to burn the painting so it doesn't exist. So he's literally going to have a bonfire of paintings to make that work. These are but that's an extreme case. Obviously, I just like the story, so I share it. But ultimately, these are the kinds of things that you're starting to look at when you see these worlds intersect. And we've read a lot recently of how these worlds are intersecting. I talked about how people are building things, and so here's a company that wound up doing one of the largest land deals in the virtual environment. They paid $2.4 million to buy a piece of virtual land in the fashion area. And what they're doing, we've got a great business case for it. They are going to be hosting and renting that space and building out custom environments for brands to have fashion shows, to be able to sell luxury fashion goods, et cetera. So there'll be a shopping element, there'll be a fashion show element. And when you think about that, they are people who are going to be able to break the laws of physics, defy reality, create truly extraordinary environments for fashion shows, but also their turnaround will be really quick. You want to create something? Great. You can create something that's very custom to you. And then within that same environment, they will be able to break that down and put something up for someone different fairly quickly, because we're talking about code rather than talking about a physical environment that requires a longer term build. So that's that. In talking about kind of the overlap between these two areas, McDonald's made announcements a couple weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, I want to say, about putting together and buying trademarks within a virtual environment. What's interesting about what they've said is they're going to build virtual restaurants that will deliver food to you in real life. So if you are in a virtual environment, you can stop at a McDonald's and it will bring food to your actual real world home. And so it's one more channel for them to be able to engage and simplify what the journey is, cut the process down, et cetera. And this banks on the fact, obviously, that there will be a significant amount of people in that space. And all of a sudden it banks on the idea of there being properties through which to deal with the communication side on that. So from a commerce perspective, and the one thing I didn't say, but I do think that we're gonna, this is a question that brands are gonna have to answer for themselves, is when we talk about commerce and when we talk about transactions and when we talk about Web3, if that side of the tokenomics exists, people are gonna have to answer questions for themselves of how do they fit within that? Do they accept crypto payments? Do they accept this in interesting ways? There's obviously lots of brands finding different answers to that question, and the idea of taking custody of a wallet is one that people will have different answers to along the way. But this is definitely one where a native population is going to expect to be able to see more and more moving in that direction. The next element, obviously, is how your product translates into that virtual world and what that overlap looks like. And lastly, how you start to, and obviously how you partner the real and the virtual goods. And then when we think about the land, I talked about kind of renting it, but you're starting to see this kind of fractional access or fractional ownership that's going to come in. People are going to be looking at how that can work so that brands can create things that where one item might be able to be owned by multiple parties and be able to be accessed by multiple parties. The real superpower of the internet has always been networks, though. And with that, Web3 builds onto that and looks at community. So the obvious image here is Bored Ape Yacht Club. This is an old slide, so apologies, I should have updated it. I'm looking at the floor price right now, and it says 83. It's higher than that at this point, but that doesn't matter. The key point here is that the centers of community within these kind of Web3 environments tend so far not to be the brands themselves. The Adidas example that I gave at the beginning, Adidas didn't raise their hand and say, come like us, come follow us. They said, we'll buy a Bored Ape, and actually we'll go into the Bored Ape community, and what is it that we can give back as Adidas to the Bored Ape community? So they're not trying to be the center. They're trying to find natural partnerships where their brand has something intrinsic to offer, and where it's participation that they actually gain, and what that win-win starts to look like. And that kind of credibility is huge. When Visa jumped into and bought a CryptoPunk, which they did very well on based on that investment as well. But all of a sudden the press and the PR that they got from that community was hugely positive, because they didn't try to change it. They didn't try to own it. They tried to say, we want to come in, we want to participate, we want to be a part of it, rather than it's all about us. But when we think about community, there's lots of elements that exist. Music is obviously something where community is huge. This is a piece that came out recently from BUDWEISER. And the idea here is really simple. Buy an NFT, it's a song, they're small bands, but what it allows you to do if you own this, if you've bought this, is you can kind of say, I was a fan of that artist way back when. So it's kind of credibility. When you go back and think about what I presented as my intro of who I am, that deterministic element, this is relative proof that, you know what, here's something that I really was a part of, or that I really did enjoy. If you think about like the Sex Pistols show at the 100 Club, there's lots of stories of the people who were at that show. The club only holds about 100 people. There's no way as many people who claim to have been at that show could have been at that show. I know I'm showing my age right now when I use that as an example, but you get the idea. Other natural communities, obviously sports, I already talked about that. So the NBA has done something really interesting, but I think what Des Bryant is an American football player. He's launching an NFT where he's trying to build communities around players. And what he's doing is really interesting, because what he's doing is he's creating an NFT that has a direct data feed that comes in and brings in the player stats, what they're actually doing time and time again, how they perform week on week. And the NFT is going to be dynamic. It is going to change visually and behaviorally based on the player stats that exist there. This allows you to be more engrossed with the player. It allows the player to actually participate in a different way with elements. But this idea of creating live and dynamic data that come into these areas is something that will allow kind of bigger brands where off-chain data might be able to come in to think about how they engage with people in a new and different way. Obviously, when we think about community, when we think about these things, so far, when we talk about NFTs, up until recently, it had been, this is an article from the end of last year, but it had been a fairly male-dominated environment. That trend is changing in a big way at the moment, and female-driven NFT projects are probably one of the more powerful and fastest growing areas of the category. But I think it's really important to look at that, because when you think about where your values are, and a brand like L'Oreal looked at this and went, actually, we need to make sure we're giving back to female artists. And so they promoted a new lipstick, launched a series of NFTs all about the color red, but it was all about bringing female artists together and making sure that they saw the money for that, et cetera. And you're starting to see that trend grow. So this is an NFT collection called Boss Beauties. They're partnering with the United Nations. You're starting to see kind of Reese Witherspoon, who's a very vocal voice in this community. And she's partnered and owns World of Women NFTs, but she's talking about how she's adapting those into content and using them for IP in order to build that out and look at that. You're also then going a step further and saying, okay, what other communities can exist? So I've talked about them around NFTs. DAOs are a form of organization. So they might be tokenized in some ways, but ultimately they are an organizing force that stands for decentralized autonomous organization. But the idea here is that they can be built around their social impact sides, their corporate governance sides. There's a bunch of different elements that are coming out. This is one that said, we'll buy a golf course, and they're trying to build a business. There's one that's trying to buy the Blockbuster brand, and in order to create a decentralized streaming service to compete with Netflix. There are a bunch of different ones. This I think is really interesting. This is a company, this is a business called, or a DAO called OpenDAO, and they looked at OpenSea, and one of the biggest complaints about OpenSea, the NFT marketplace, is that that they don't have a token. And so what they did was say, actually, we're going to create a token, and we're going to drop it, and what we're going to do is we're going to give that token for free to people who have transacted previously on OpenSea. Now, OpenSea being a blockchain-based company, everyone who's transacted on there, you can see which wallet addresses have transacted with OpenSea, and you can see the value of those transactions and the time of those transactions. So what they were able to do is say, we will reward people with tokens based on their previous behaviors with a competitor. It's called a vampire attack. That's a different story, but ultimately that's what we're starting to see. And when you think about that from a media perspective or from a CRM perspective, it becomes quite interesting. There are a number of people who are starting to build out decentralized ad exchanges, et cetera, and that's something that's at its early side, but you're starting to see that kind of thought process. But what the idea here is that ultimately you could target, if, for example, there was an article recently that Alfa Romeo have a car that's coming out where they're going to put the title and make the title an NFT and make the maintenance NFTs so that this stuff can't be fraudulent, so that it's on chain, the records of how you treat that car. Well, guess what? If anyone ever wanted to talk to the car owners, if a competing car brand wanted to talk to those car owners, they could airdrop messages directly to the wallet of that particular car, of the exact car owners. It wouldn't be the kind of probabilistic side of things. They could deal with it that way. Now that's probably still too early to see that in a mature and effective way. But those are the types of strategies that are going to start to be thought about around community, because it's open and it's visible. There are also people who are looking at how you make that private. So there are companies that are looking at how do they obfuscate that information, even if it is there. So this is an early stage area. But when we think about community, it's really not about trying to be the center of everything. It's about trying to find collaborative advantage in the way Adidas has. It's trying to find ways to give something back and be very authentic in that sense. And in the way that I talked about kind of dynamic elements, it's about trying to make it fun. But ultimately, I think we also need to be thinking about what does that next generation of CRM look like. So here's quick to wrap up what you can do. I'd say number one, know the language. Here's a bunch of language, right? And there's a bunch of things to know what they mean. Know who the partners are. There's obviously too many to know them all, but it's worth looking at what the different categories of brands are that are starting to build out in the space are, and that will start to inform more of what the opportunities look like. Avoid the landmines, and there's going to be a lot of them, right? I'm not talking about some of the IP risk, some of the brand safety elements, but there are going to be quite a few elements to watch out for. So protect brands, think about these things, it's paramount. Have a strategy that really clearly identifies the role of the channel, the role of the platform, in the way that we've all thought about, well, what is the role of channels today? We even if you're not building things right now, you should be thinking about, what is the role of that space, so that when you move and when you do something, or when you help someone else do something, that there is a clearly identified view as a starting point. Recognize that, a lot of NFTs are going to lose value. You can look at even the most ardent supporters, that this is an area which is volatile, and a lot will lose value. So don't just throw people into these things. Also, develop frameworks and strategies for the ecosystem. There's this idea of go to market. There's a lot of people talking about ideas around go to community and what that actually looks like, and how managing Discord actually works, and looking at the rituals that exist within those communities and how you actually build into that. So build out the frameworks, build out the platforms, understand that. Look at kind of the side of planning, whether it's a DAO. DAOs are probably going to do could do a lot of work for creative testing, for other forms of testing, for other elements. We'll start to see those kind of take different forms and shapes beyond what we're seeing. So build out the tools and the strategies to help involve that, and then recognize that this is still early days, right? So be honest about what's real today and what's speculative. Think about how you measure value, but recognize that some things aren't actually measurable at this point in time. Be honest about where sustainability is planned for that. There are a lot of brands that are working to drive real sustainable solutions in this space, in tokenized spaces, et cetera. Build up a view of the right tools and partners. I'm obviously not here to do that today. I'm just trying to give you the right overview. But remember, within all of that, the fundamentals of marketing, the fundamentals of this aren't changing. Brands are still going to need to capture awareness, to engage people, to let people know what they what they really stand for, to give people a reason to make those choices and to make those choices easier. This is just another tool in the tool belt to make that happen. So then the last is kind of business readiness, right? So everyone should own their own ENS. I'd even recommend that you do it as individuals personally. But that's just me. That's my personal take. Don't think anything I'm saying is a recommendation, because it's not. But also, we know what some of the hurdles are going to be if you want to move into this space, right? There's going to be finance community hurdles. There's going to be legal policy hurdles. There's going to be identity resolution hurdles. Go, and even if you don't have plans to do anything right now, start engaging in those conversations. So when you do have plans, they don't take you by surprise. There are lots of brands that are working in the space. I know of brands right now that are trying to work with alcohol brands to help them with identity solutions, so that if someone wants to buy something using a wallet, how do they validate that they are of legal age? There are lots of brands that are starting to think about how they deal with that identity resolution side of things and being able to help. So there's a lot that's there. Last, we've always talked about for years kind of test and learn. Test and learn insinuates that you're constantly doing something. The idea here is you might not actually be constantly doing something, but you probably do. Like I always think that dipping your toe in the water and learning about things is a good thing. So it's not test and learn, it's trial balloons in my mind. Is find that one project, find that element that's going to force the conversations within your organizations, that's going to force this to kind of come to the surface, figure out what they are, whether it be something like POAPs where you can deal with an event, whether it be something in a VR environment, but find those things that elevate the consciousness around this and get people within your organization to think about it. And lastly, I'd say dive in yourselves. And with that, I kind of say thank you. I think there's time for a few questions. Hopefully I didn't run too far over, but that's that. I've got information about me on the last slide. If you want any of it, there you go.
Fabulous. Thank you. So no, thank you. Boy, you covered a lot. If we don't have any questions from the audience, I'm going to ask a couple that I have. So you can beat me to it or not. Nope. So you touched on this briefly around legal policies. It feels like Web3, Metaverse, NFTs are moving faster than any form of legislation. What do you see? What do you think this will mean? Does it mean that we're going to try and retrospectively put on belts and braces? Does it mean that there is a risk for people who are investing now that what they've invested in may suddenly be outlawed?
I'm not qualified to give a strong legal opinion, which is why I don't. So I won't do that from that perspective. But what I will say is we have already seen areas where rules change and that impacts people, and that impacts where it impacts holders of elements. I would expect that we will see more accounting rules, more taxability rules from different jurisdictions. I would expect that you will see those jurisdictions have different policies of how the accounting works. What those policies will be, I don't want to make comment on. But the key question to me is how do each of your organizations and how do all organizations start to build policies and awareness of what those different elements are within the jurisdictions where they operate, so they can make informed decisions about the risk they're willing to assume, the risk they're not willing to assume. And I have seen projects, I have witnessed projects move quite a way down the road, only to stall at the last mile because someone thought they could do something, and then they're told we can't have we can't take custody of a wallet. We can't take this. So I've witnessed firsthand some of the challenges that can exist and that can go wrong. So this is new space. Having the conversations early within your organizations helps to at least make sure that you know what your internal issues will be. The external issues will be something different.
Thanks. Once again,
I know that's a hedged comment, but it's just because I can't give legal advice because that's something I'm just not qualified to do.
No, of course. I think that your speculation was spot on. And I guess now with 1 minute left, the final question is, what NFTs have you been buying?
Oh, so the things that I'm actually interested in, there's lots of interesting communities for kind of gated Discord and gated communities where people have interesting conversations, things like Friends with Benefits, which is kind of a gated Discord channel. I know it sounds like that, but no, that's not what this is. But where there are people ultimately having an interesting conversation around what's coming, what new areas of either NFT investment, new protocols are coming out, what are the new startups that are happening. There's just interesting kind of backroom conversation, for lack of a better word, that exists, and those are the things that interest me. There are a number of different communities like that. I participate in some, I don't in others. I would like to participate in some that I just simply can't afford to get into because the problem with the tokenomics on some of these things is that they do explode in value. But there's interesting things that are happening, and for me, the biggest thing is just participating because there's a lot to learn. And most of the learning is self-learning for me at this stage. Obviously, we're doing a bunch of work with other people, but you get the idea.
Great. Once again, Justin, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for that fabulous presentation, all your trends, recommendations, pitfalls to watch out for. This session has been recorded. We will post it on our YouTube channel and hope to have you back and talk about this some more. See you later.
Thank you very much, Miranda. See you soon, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.